Hello again, everyone, and it's so good to have you here on Thanksgiving night on Steve Beverly's TV Classics. And if you weren't with us last night, let me say happy Thanksgiving, one and all, to all of you who are watching. And I hope maybe during the course of the day, if you haven't been a football fan or if you just wanted to have something different on your television menu, that you clicked in on us and had a chance to see some of the great classics of television. And we just have such a thrill in bringing that to you every year here on E Plus TV6. Those of you who are watching on eplustv6.com all over the country, it's great to have you with us, and I hope you are celebrating very, very well. Well, we have today, and if you tuned into NBC earlier today, you saw the most current version of the Macy's Thanksgiving Day Parade. Now, they didn't have the parade last year because of COVID, but this has been a tradition since really television had the ability to go live in different locations in the mid-1950s. And in 1954, that was when television first had the Macy's Thanksgiving Day Parade, and that was on NBC. They were the only network that carried the entire parade. Now, CBS in 1957 added the Thanksgiving Day Parade Jubilee that was hosted by Captain Kangaroo. And there were a number of CBS News correspondents that were live for various Thanksgiving Day parades all over the country. But Captain Kangaroo was your anchor man back in New York. And he'd have a visit from Mr. Green Jeans and Bunny Rabbit and Mr. Moose during the tail end of it, because they didn't want to get too silly before they got to all the rest of the parades. And eventually, in the 60s, the captain stepped aside, and it was called the All-American Thanksgiving Day Parades. It was really the same parades, but they decided rather than having the captain, CBS wanted to have some of its primetime stars to host the various parades. But NBC maintained the tradition of the Macy's Thanksgiving Day Parade, and they were positioned right down below from where their main studios were at 30 Rock in New York City. And so we have a real treat for you tonight. This is going to take you back to the Macy's Thanksgiving Day Parade 62 years ago in 1959. The commentators for the parade, an NBC announcer whose voice was very familiar to you on many game shows, Bill Wendell, and the man who at that time was hosting a show called Do Re Mi, but you began to know him much better in the 60s as the host of The Match Game, and later, when it came back in a new version on CBS, Match Game 73 and all the succeeding years. And that's Gene Rayburn. That's the way Johnny Olson would always introduce him. Yeah, Gene Rayburn is one of the commentators on this one. And so we're going to just take you back through the time tunnel here on Thanksgiving night. If you didn't get to see the parade, then watch this, because you'll see how television covered it in 1959. NBC's Macy's Thanksgiving Day Parade. Now, wasn't that something? Thanksgiving Day Parade in 1959. It was rather primitive. It was black and white, and they had fewer cameras than they use today, but it still had the same type of flavor because they were doing it right in front of NBC at 30 Rockefeller Plaza in New York. And so it became really one of the real traditions. And over the years, you had people like, for many years, Lorne Greene and Betty White did the NBC Thanksgiving Day Parade together. And so Betty was teamed with a number of people until finally, when she became popular on the Mary Tyler Moore Show on CBS in the 1970s, Betty was not asked to do the NBC parades anymore. And they began to make it a sort of a resting place for the Today Show hosts to go right on and do that. And NBC has expanded the parade coverage over the years to about 3 hours. But it's always a tradition to have the Rockettes at some point. They had it earlier in this one, but also bands from all over the country, high school bands, and that was something that they had to raise money for all year long to be able to afford the trip for all the many band members that they had. And you saw them from all over the country, and it was very competitive to try to get in and be accepted to be a part of the Thanksgiving Day Parade, the Macy's Parade in particular. But I hope you enjoyed that, because it was really, even though it's a period piece now to look back 62 years ago, it was how television stretched itself to do things live outside of a studio. Mostly the only thing that they really did other than that was sports. And so parades were really something that were a staple not only for networks but for local stations, because I can remember growing up in Columbus, Georgia, and the Columbus Christmas Parade was covered live by both television stations in town. They had different vantage points, but both stations carried their respective Christmas parades through the many, many years. Finally, in the late 60s, they quit doing that. Well, we'll move on from the Macy's Parade to something that aired the week after Thanksgiving in 1954. In fact, it was December 1st, 1954. It was the Wednesday night immediately after Thanksgiving. And one of the great comedy teams of all time, Bud Abbott and Lou Costello. But that's not who is surprised on this one. It was Stan Laurel and Oliver Hardy. And if you think about all of those shorts that they did for so many, many years, and they were right up there with the Three Stooges of people who enjoyed their slapstick brand of comedy. Well, they were surprised by Ralph Edwards on December 1st, 1954 on This Is Your Life. And I think if you look back at how Ralph details, he was just brilliant, and his writers were brilliant in the way that they detailed a celebrity's life as it unfolded. And it was harder to do when you were doing two people at once, and particularly when they weren't related. But he did a brilliant job, and I think you're going to see that as he weaves the tale of one of television's and the movies' great comedy teams. And so here we go to a 67-year-old edition of This Is Your Life. This Is Your Life, in its original version, was on at 10 o'clock on Wednesday nights. And a lot of people really wondered why it didn't air earlier in the evening, because it was always a family show and the stories were just so rich. But the fact is that This Is Your Life carved out a place in which the ratings were just so strong when it premiered in 1953. It had been on radio, but then it premiered in 1953 on NBC television, that the feeling was, don't tamper with it. And they didn't until 1960-61. And the decision was made, they took a risk with it, and they decided to move it to Sunday nights at 10:30 because NBC had never been able to challenge What's My Line with a successful show head-to-head. So they thought that perhaps This Is Your Life would be the show that would do it. Well, it didn't, because What's My Line was just so established in that late Sunday night time slot, and the mystery guests and those panelists. And I think one of the things that also hurt was the fact that when it moved to Sunday night, This Is Your Life was not done live anymore. They pre-taped the show earlier in the week. And it was something that took a little bit of the spontaneity out of it, although it was done live to tape. But it was just not the same as that Wednesday night tradition, and so it was canceled in 1961. It did not return to the air until 1971 in January, and that's when it had a revival in syndication for 2 years. Ralph Edwards came back and was the host of the show. And there were a series of specials that were done in the 80s. Pat Sajak actually hosted one in the 90s. But it has never really, since that syndicated version in the 70s, it's never really come back as a weekly series. I do believe it could still work, but the only problem is today that so many of the celebrities that you would probably think, and they typically would go in today probably for those who were popular in television. It probably would not be as strong as it was in the past because there just seems to be so many celebrities are here today and gone tomorrow compared to the ones who are so enduring in years past. And the other thing is they wouldn't do the show live today, and I think that hurts it. You've got to be able to have that real suspense as to who is going to be surprised. And so, but it was a tremendous show, and people all over America watched on Wednesday nights at 10 o'clock. Well, someone who also was a popular regular on television in the 1950s, he had mostly daytime shows in the 50s. He had one summer show that was on at night. But in the 60s, ABC gave him his own primetime variety show that ran for 3 years. Started on Thursday nights, ended up on Fridays. And he was always one. Of course, many people after that knew him for his sausage. But he was one of the just real laid back, a little bit country, a little bit pop, but he could do a little bit of everything. And wherever he was on television, people usually watched. And so tonight we're going to bring you the Christmas edition of the Jimmy Dean Show from 1964. And Jimmy was just really one of those people that if he was in your home on your television set, you just felt very, very comfortable. And I hope you do for this on this Thanksgiving night. So here we go, the Jimmy Dean Show going back 57 years, and I hope you enjoy it. I want to tell you a couple of interesting things about Jimmy Dean. Not anything to do with his sausage, but Jimmy had a daytime show, 2 o'clock in the afternoon, on CBS in the late 1950s. It ran for a year, and then CBS canceled it. And Jimmy was mad because he found out about the cancellation by reading it in Variety. Somebody at the network, and there've been a lot of stories about performers whose shows were canceled, and they found out in the back door. And that's what happened in this case, is that Jimmy was in a situation where he read it in the trade papers, so he went on the air that day, and he had a rapper from one of his sponsors, and he told the entire audience that was watching, he said, "Now, folks, I'm going to tell you something. I just don't believe that we have such a small audience that we ought to be canceled. So I want each and every one of you that wants to see us stay on the air," and he named the name of the CBS executive who was responsible for canceling the show. "I want you to send a rapper from this product and send it to this address and to this man. And let's see just exactly how they feel about it and our sponsors feel about it." Well, guess what happened? the executive and the sponsor were flooded, absolutely flooded with those rappers. But CBS would not change its mind whatsoever. And so they decided to go with a soap opera called Full Circle. And Full Circle laid the biggest egg. It was just not there. So the bottom line to it is that Jimmy Dean just had to be patient, and he came back on the air with the 3-year variety show that he had. Never was a big hit, but it was actually the show that introduced Ralph, who was the first Muppet. Yes, Jim Henson introduced his first Muppet, Ralph, on the Jimmy Dean Show in the 60s. How about that? So it was a fun show, and I hope you enjoyed his Christmas celebration because he was just really sort of an everyman type of performer. Well, we wind up here with another show that was on Thanksgiving night, and this one, Thanksgiving night in 1963. For its final 2 years in its original primetime version, Password with Alan Ludden was on Thursday nights. And in 1963, it was Thursday nights at 7:30. And so they had as the celebrities, and they did this show together 3 different times. One of them with their 2 daughters, and we've shown you that episode before. But this is one that they played the whole 30 minutes with regular contestants. And that's Jimmy and Gloria Stewart. They played Password with their daughters at home, and it's just always, I always thought it was great because Password, the original version, they got big names to appear, and you saw them in a different light than whether they were on the movie screens or if they were on a television series. They just were game players, and it was a lot of fun. So here we go. We're going to take you back on this one, 58 years. Thanksgiving night, 1963. Jimmy and Gloria Stewart on Password. The Stewarts absolutely loved playing the game. It was one of those things that when Jimmy Stewart agreed to do this, and he didn't do many game shows at all. He appeared as a mystery guest on What's My Line at one point. But he really didn't do this very often, but it's because it was a game they enjoyed playing at home, and they were very competitive at their house, and their daughters loved playing the game, and so they came on the primetime edition 3 different times. And Password was a show that had people like Jimmy Stewart, Danny Thomas, Lucille Ball, Raymond Burr, Robert Stack. You name some of the biggest name performers. Jane Fonda, before she became a huge name, she appeared as a contestant, celebrity player on Password. James Mason. So many of the big stars of television and movies played the game, particularly the evening version of the show. And I think that's one thing that gave it a note of distinction, in addition to the fact that Password was a very educational game that was played in schools all over America to teach vocabulary skills. And it was a terrific game for that. We did it in my 4th grade class. Flo Sims was the teacher, and guess who was the host every time? yeah. I made up the words, and so we played it once a week after we came back for lunch. She didn't let us have a full half hour, but she gave us 20 minutes to play Password, and we used that to our best advantage because it was one of those things that all of my classmates wanted to keep going. No, we got to go on and do geography. And yeah, that's the way it went. But Password was just such a fun game, and Alan Ludden was the absolute perfect host of the show. He had been a school teacher early in his adult life, and then he went to New York and became a radio personality, and then became a radio and television executive with CBS. And he was one of the masterminds behind the original GE College Bowl, and he was the first host of that show. And Alan was brilliant at being able to rifle off all of those questions that were so complicated to those varsity scholars. And it was a real touchy situation. He was doing both Password and College Bowl during the first year that Password was on the air. And as I've told you a story, and Betty White related to me how mad Alan was about this, the fact that he was forced to make a choice to either stay with Password or to stay with GE College Bowl when CBS decided to move Password to Sunday nights at 6:30, only 1 hour after the College Bowl. And it was not a happy situation, and Alan never forgave the CBS executive who made him choose between the two. Today, as many shows as people like Ryan Seacrest, Tom Bergeron, you name all of them, as many as they do, you know, just think about it. Steve Harvey, nobody would think a thing about that today. But I'm thankful that we have all of the Password episodes available from prime time for you to be able to enjoy in the same way that we did back in the 1960s. Well, this wraps up our Thanksgiving night new edition of TV Classics, but tomorrow night at 6, we got another brand new one. Saturday night at 6, another brand new one, as we do on Sunday night at 6. So the hits are just going to keep on coming. Just stay tuned right after we go away here, because there's going to be another of our original TV classics that we've done through the years. And then tomorrow night at 6, back here with another brand new one. So until we're with you again, did I say that right? No. Until we're with you again got it right that time. This is Steve Beverly saying, remember the famous words of Don Hudlow as he reflected again today on Thanksgiving Day. No truer words have been said from falser teeth. I'll see you in just a few minutes.